Well, hello. Welcome to episode 3 of the 5-Minute Geek Show. I'm your host, Matt Stauffer, and since video blogging and blogging are geeky things, I think one of the appropriate things to talk about on the 5-Minute Geek Show is video blogging and all this kind of stuff we're doing here. And I'm not going to do a whole geek show on this, but I've got to share a few things. So first thing I've discovered so far is that daily is too much. It's too much for me to do, and it's too much for you to keep up with. Maybe if everybody who was following this were just doing the audio, it'd be easy to queue up a whole bunch of 5-minute things, on your drive to work, whatever. But YouTube, video, consuming that on a daily basis, I've found a lot of people are coming across each one a couple days late, and I'm just like, a couple times a week's going to be better. So I'm going to try maybe a Tuesday, Thursday kind of thing. Thing number 2, you need to plan at least a little bit. No matter how off the cuff I want this to be for the sake of it not taking too much time, I need a little bit of planning, and I'll talk in a second about what that looks like for me. Number 3, let's just go into it. Episode 2, I was not happy with. I think there was 2 things. One, not enough planning, so a little bit of planning saves us from some awkward rambling, but also a little bit of coffee saves us from some awkward rambling. So it's a wonderful life. It's a wonderful card. Thank you, Starbucks, for making me ramble less. Number 1 right now, 15. There are a couple different options for hosting audio podcasts. The 2 best ones I found so far, well, the best one is simplecast.fm. That's what my friend Adam Wathen uses for his Full Stack Radio podcast, which you should check out. And it's $12 a month. It's $12 a month for hosting everything. It hosts your website, it hosts your audio, all that kind of stuff. But for me, $12 a month for this silly little thing was not really a good deal, because this isn't a big deal. This is 5 minutes. It's a geek show. So the other option is if you use SoundCloud, you get up to a free SoundCloud account gets up to free 3 free hours, and they have this kind of thing that they're rolling out right now where your SoundCloud account can kind of become like a podcasting account. And so I applied for that, and they said they're going to get back to me in 3 or 5 days, which is basically today. So we'll see how that works out. But of course, me being the kind of entrepreneurial type, I'm like, ooh, I could build a thing, and I'm like, no, you're already building too many things. But that's kind of what happened. And then, oh yeah, the last thing, there are 2 professional producers who are also professional podcasters on the Titan team who work with me day in, day out. That's Dave Hicking and Adam Wathen. So I need to do better. Basically, I need to do better. So so we talked a little bit about some of the things I'm going to do better. One of them is that I'm going to have 5 minutes of content, 5-Minute Geek Show, but I'm going to allow myself a little bit of space for intros and outros, and I think that's going to help a little bit, so I'm not frantically rushing through, and 5 minutes is already kind of a trimmed amount of time for these things. But I'm also going to allow myself a little bit of space to possibly edit if I need, and to plan a little bit beforehand, rather than just forcing myself to make everything off the cuff. So if I think of an idea, I'm going to write it down and maybe add a couple little sub-points for me to talk from. We'll see how it works. We'll see. So today, 5-Minute Geek Show topic, SDK best practices. So SDKs. So basically an SDK it's supposed to be a software development kit. It means all the wrapping you get around some kind of deliverable from an external, like an API or something like that. And often it was like this big, lots of files and configurations and all that kind of stuff. But often when we talk about an SDK right now, it often, especially in the PHP world, you're really just talking about a package. In PHP, it's going to be a PHP package, or it could be Ruby Gem or whatever, that wraps some external data source, usually an API, and makes it easier to interact with. So, for example, an SDK for the YouTube API says that rather than having to understand all the different routes that are available to you in the YouTube API and call them manually via curl or guzzle or something like that, an SDK gives you nice, convenient, easy methods that are basically returning a certain type of object, and they take a certain type of parameters, and they do all the calling for you. So this is really useful, and anytime you use some sort of external API, it'd be really nice if you use an SDK, because it's going to make your life a lot better. It's going to be more consistent with other people who are calling the same API, all that kind of stuff. Cool, great. So I've been using some recently. I used the Withings API, which is a health kind of thing where it tracks your weight and all that kind of stuff. And then I also used the YouTube API actually when I built the current piece of crap 5-Minute Geek Show website, which is literally just the default Laravel install site with a couple extra data in there. And one of the things I wanted to do was pull all the the videos from a certain playlist and list them off. So I used the YouTube SDK, looked it up on Packageist, and I used it to quickly pull down all the videos from a certain playlist and then hydrate them and then, list out some of their details. So one of the things I've been running to as I see people design SDKs is that they design their SDK around the shape of the API. And so if the API's got, one endpoint that's named playlists, then they'll have a playlists method, and it's get playlists, and then you pass in whatever parameters that the playlists route and the API expects, which makes sense. You're designing a local piece of software that represents an external data source. You design it in the same way that lines up with the external data source. The problem is often those external data sources are poorly named. They're confusing. They might be named or structured the way they are because of some technical concern. It's actually really difficult to use as an end user. So one of the things I've started doing recently is making value objects locally, which is basically just creating a plain old PHP object when you're working in PHP that represents the thing that you're working with, and then providing an intermediary layer between my value object and the API. And what I'm really appreciating doing is saying, look, I've got a concept of a playlist, I've got a concept of a video. A playlist has a lot of videos in it, or at least one. So I'm going to create a video object that has all the properties of a video. I'm going to create a playlist object that has all the properties of a playlist. And with things, I'm going to create a measurement object. I'm going to create a weight. Maybe there's their enums or whatever, but basically I'm going to create a local thing that represents it. I'm going to design those objects the way I want to use them with no regard for the YouTube API, with no regard for the Withings API, and then I'm going to put an intermediary layer that gets the data from the external API and then creates or fills or whatever either these objects or collections of these objects. And I found that this is just this amazing experience of working with things where it's like, oh, you got to memorize this quirky thing. What's a measure? I'm not really sure what a measure is in Withings. I expect maybe it's a measurement, but it turns out it's not. It's actually a weird kind of grouping of measurements. Screw that. I'm going to make an object called measurement. It's going to have a type. Is it a weight measurement? Is it a height measurement? I have no idea. I'll figure it out. I designed this, and I actually learned this from Taylor Otwell. He says when he's designing a new feature in Laravel, he spends most of his time sitting in front of just a blank screen saying, how would a user want to use this? And then he designs that, and then he backfills from there. Well, that's what I've started doing. What are the objects I want to work with? What are the responses I want to work with? And how can I design them in a very usable, easy way? And then I go backfill. And there's a tweet from, gosh, I think it was Matt Machuga who responded to me, but I might be mixing people up, but I think it was Matt Machuga, who basically said, yeah, when we're building this out, because I asked people on Twitter, do you prettify, the API response, or do you actually just make it directly map it? And they said basically, like, first of all, I build a wrapper layer around their API to make it easy to make calls to theirs, and then I build the front-facing, here's what you should actually use. So there's actually 3 layers. API, the API caller, which is probably in PHP wrapping around Guzzle, and in the end, it's the actual objects and responses that you're working with. So that's what I'm working around. I'm working on making a call to the primary PHP Withings, or a pull request to the primary PHP Withings library to kind of make some of those changes, and then I'm thinking I'm going to do the same with YouTube. So it's fun to think about that, both in terms of SDKs, but also in terms of our encode. We create these value objects that we're passing around, and then we fill them, however, from an external API, from an Eloquent object, or whatever. So, and then that brings in all kind of conversations about active record versus data mapper, which we don't have time for today because we're out of time. That's it. So, thankfully, I don't have to rush through the theme song because that was 5 minutes of content, and now I can take as long as I want. But still going to do it on the spot. I had some really cool ideas for theme songs, by the way. I might blow your mind, but right now we're doing the use whatever tools are available around you. So that's what I'm going to do. So for those of you who are just listening to the audio, I'm holding 2 Expo markers, a green and a blue Expo bold color dry erase marker, and I'm going to make up a little bit of something on the spot here. So let's go. The 5-Minute Geek Show is the best show that's named the 5-Minute Geek Show. Bam!